Today we are here with two live humans, including myself and Dr. Anand Rao from the University of Mary Washington. Anand and I actually debated each other in high school in the late 1980s, and I won't comment on who won the debates. The most advanced topic I think we debated at the time was on the agriculture topic. We debated about weather modernization, or modification. So that was really looking far into the future, into science fiction. And then in college, we went to the University of Pittsburgh and we debated against each other. I remember one time there was some issue related to artificial intelligence. I can't even remember the details, but I ended up in the science fiction part of the library to kind of do a little bit of research on this topic. There obviously were some other things written, but not much. So it's kind of amazing that about 30 years later, we are sitting here today and we're talking about how to use artificial intelligence to do actual debate research and expand the capabilities beyond what ChatGPT offers. We know that you can find out a lot of things on ChatGPT, as I'm sure as a debater and a coach, you know that, but you probably also know that the current database appears to be restricted to the end of 2021, and it doesn't give you actual articles, right? Like it kind of produces a summary, it's generating its summary, its explanation. You can debate about whether or not you can use that as evidence, at least as of now, most people do not. So how do we get to the actual articles? How can we use ChatGPT to find more recent articles and to do actual debate research? And Dr. Rao is going to talk about that.
Great, thanks, Stefan. As Stefan noted, we debated against each other and then debated as partners in college. Stefan always cut better cards than I did, but I think if I'd had ChatGPT back then, I would have had better arguments at that stage. It's amazing, I think, as all of you have found, just to see what some of the capabilities are for ChatGPT. But we also know the limitations, as Stefan mentioned, limited knowledge of world and events after 2021. They note that right on the landing screen. And it also has what they call hallucinations, where it makes up sources and information. So you might ask it for a quote about something that's occurring right now, and instead of just saying it can't do it, it'll just make up a source. And so there are some real limitations here in terms of what it can provide and how you can go through and especially look for something that's a little more current. What I was sharing with Stefan before, and he asked me to share with all of you, is to talk a bit about a couple of the extensions that are available on Chrome. And you'll probably see that my ChatGPT looks a little bit different at times than yours might. The first one I wanted to point out is this this extension for Chrome called Copy for ChatGPT, and you'll see how it works. It's very easy to add in, and it basically gives you a button so that after you run a search on ChatGPT, you can then copy to clipboard. It makes it very easy then to copy to another document. This is a pretty useful tool. There are a couple of other extensions that do it even in a more robust way, but this is a very easy way to be able to get started. The other one is Web ChatGPT, and I'll show you what the difference is between using regular ChatGPT and what you do with Web ChatGPT. Effectively, what this does is this extension allows for ChatGPT to incorporate current web searches. So you can have it search for 3, 5, or 10 sources, and you can stipulate from how long ago they might come, from the last week, the last month, the last year, or at any point, as well as specify the region that it might search from. So it's not a complete solution, but it is a bit of a stopgap. And until OpenAI opens it up and allows ChatGPT to be able to run current searches, this is a good way to be able to search for some of this on your own. So if I just do, and you can see I have a lot of different searches here. It's one I'm working on for another class. I'm going to start a new search and just do something like, and right now I have Web ChatGPT turned off. So if I ask about why should Supreme Court justices have term limits? And you'll see the kind of response that you will typically find in ChatGPT. Usually it comes up with a bunch of really great arguments, fairly succinct. You can ask it to expand upon some of those, but you'll notice that it's not citing any sources. It's not including anything that's current, doesn't have any links to be able to look for something else. So I'm going to, as soon as this is done, I'm going to show you something. Right here is that button I was talking about, copy to clipboard. If I click on it, then I can then copy it to another document. That makes it really easy to output the material that ChatGPT produces. Now I've turned on search on the web, and I have it as 10 results, and you can limit it to as few as 1 all the way up to 10 results for the past day, week, month, year, anytime, and also specify the region, depending upon if you're looking for something in a particular country. I'm just going to leave it as any region. And let me try this again, and I'm going to say rewrite reasons justices we'll see what this produces. And it gave me some reasons why, and then I asked for it to include published sources, and it made references to things like the Journal of Political Science, but it didn't really give us the link for any of them. So then I asked it to do it again, and this time I'm going to scroll down so you can see what the query looked like. I asked it to rewrite the argument for term limits and include published sources to support each point, including the name of the source in the text. So this is one thing about ChatGPT as an extension. It'll show the query at the end, but it includes first all the web search results. So you can see here are the different sources that it'll pull. Now, my experience with it is that sometimes if you're not really specific in what you're asking for, it'll pull somewhat random web search results. So if you're talking about, give me class discussion questions about this article, it'll pull up sources and websites that talk about class discussion in general. And so that's not really specific enough. You really want to say, find published sources on this topic, and then incorporate it into the results.
Yeah,
so
the one
this is
thing I
important because you
noticed,
can go through and look.
yeah, I was to say, I noticed that the number one is really not relevant, right? To Supreme Court.
Yep.
Maybe you could tie it in as a discussion if the students do anything about boards, boards and how they operate. But that said, I will say all the other, most of the other articles, you can tell just by the names of the URL, are relevant to what, and obviously you can use your brain. Fortunately, our brains still count. For something, you can use your brain and scroll through a little bit and find the sources that are relevant to your search, even if this is not perfect, even as a Google search is not perfect. This is not perfect, you can use that.
So let's look at one of these, the constitutional amendments required. And if we look at the source, that is this political article. So then we can ask it to do something like expand the fifth argument. Okay, so I'm asking it to include that fifth argument and to expand upon it. And then it'll include a quote directly from that article. And in this case, I asked it to include the name of the source, and it's not doing that. Oh, and it did at the very end. The source of the information is an article by Politico. So you can have it go a little bit deeper. Now, one of the problems with this is that when it does the web search, it's not actually pulling up that full article. The web search, web ChatGPT, is actually providing the web results to ChatGPT. So it includes some portion of the article that's related to the query. It doesn't include the entire article. So I have found a couple of times that you need to check it to make sure it is including that actual quote, that the article doesn't conclude otherwise, or that it's not making up part of the quote. It's been rare in my experience, but a couple of times it's made up some material in the source. Even though you know it's the right source, it might include other information that you didn't expect it to. I want to show an example of what I was working on earlier today when I was doing the same kind of query talking about Supreme Court justices, and we had that list of the arguments that ChatGPT produced with some of the sources. And so I asked it to rewrite the arguments. And this really comes down to how you write the query. What is it that you're asking it to do? So in this case, I asked it to rewrite the arguments in favor of term limits for the Supreme Court justices. And that's one thing I also found. If you just say rewrite the argument, sometimes it gets it wrong. It's not sure what you're referencing. So it's better to put a longer query. But I said to include sources in support of each point, and then include the link for the source of the publication and state the name of the author and the date of publication in the text of the argument. Now, it's sometimes a little bit hit or miss, but it did include it once in a while. So in this case, it gave me then these arguments, and it showed, like, here's the first one, majority support among Americans. And then it linked to 3 different articles, and all 3 of these are actual articles talking about term limits and public opinion polls about term limits for Supreme Court justices. So very germane, and it also cites the source of the poll for each one, and it gives a pretty succinct overview of it. I'm going to jump down to one at the bottom. So I looked at this one, improves the court's performance. And it says Peter Canellos wrote in Politico that term limits would make Supreme Court justices more accountable and improve the court's performance, as they would need to be more diligent and make fewer mistakes. So what I asked ChatGPT to do then is to rewrite argument number 5, that term limits would improve the court's performance. And in this rewrite, include the date of publication and provide a direct quote from the article in support of the argument. Now, I've done this several times, and typically it does a pretty good job of it. But I want to point a couple of things out. The first is that it can produce that, and it will give a direct quote. So now it became really a section of what you could use in a speech or in a paper. According to an article from Politico written by Peter Canellos, published on July 21, 2022, term limits for Supreme Court justices, quote, would make Supreme Court decisions more predictable, end quote, and would help improve the court's performance. And it goes on with an additional quote there. Now, that is something that's incredibly useful. And I think it generally gets that right. And if you use Web Chat GPT, it'll include actual sources. You can double check the source, do a quick link search and see, is that quote actually in that article? You can verify it. And then you can also then use this as good output. And there's some other applications when we get into debate, when we're thinking about quotes that you might be able to use in debate that we can explore a little later. But this is a great way to be able to get some more substance behind some of the text that ChatGPT is including. And it's a good way to be able to check against those hallucinations, because if you just have ChatGPT give you an answer, you'll have to do a separate Google search maybe to find out if that's right or wrong. In this case, you can say, here's the parameter for ChatGPT. You're going to use these sources. You can verify that source actually exists. You can verify that source actually includes that information. And then you have a better sense that it's giving you good output. So all of that works really well. Now, what I wanted to do, though, is to show that it can still make mistakes. And I think this has more to do with the kind of the early stage of what this web extension does more than ChatGPT, because the web extension, as I said, only pulls in a portion of that article. It doesn't let ChatGPT look at the entire article. So in this case, I'm going to open up the link. And it's here, and I'm just going to do a search for Canellos. Unfortunately, what it did is that it found Peter Canellos. It talks about the Supreme Court, but that's actually a link to a separate article. So it included a quote from the article, this article that it's actually linked to, attributed it to Peter Canellos. And so that's the kind of thing you still have to check on. And I think it's mostly because the Web Chat GPT extension doesn't give enough of the text for ChatGPT to be able to check. I think there are ways you can probably get around that. They'll probably fix it. I've seen that they've already have updates to that extension, but that's definitely something to check on. Now, even with that, you still know that that quote is still from this article. You can verify it. And what I love about it is being able to take one of the arguments that they gave and say, okay, now rewrite this and expand it, include a quote that supports this, and you can delve into it a little bit further. We could probably even go a little further and say, now create a short speech all about this argument, about how it would improve court performance if we have term limits for Supreme Court justices. So a lot of great benefits to this. I think at the very least, a debater or a student working on a topic, if they have a new topic, they should go and try it out on ChatGPT and make sure they're using Web Chat GPT as an extension, because they can get current information about this. For instance, I was playing around with this earlier and looking at one of the LD, I think it's the public forum topic right now, and it's whether or not the US should increase diplomacy in West Asia. And so I did a search to see whether or not Turkey should allow Finland and Sweden to join NATO. And it gave me a lot of great results, and it cited these sources. So it talked about Turkey's concerns about Sweden and Finland and countering terrorism, and it includes sources. This is a good reason to check it, because that one obviously has a broken link, and that could be a couple of reasons why. Here's another one. Let's check this one. Yeah, why is Turkey blocking Swedish and Finnish NATO membership? So a lot of them are very good. And you can always verify them by going back up and looking at this list, and you see, all right, yeah, this is one from Swiss Info talking about NATO members and Turkey and Hungary and ratification for NATO. And some of these others are also good qualified sources too. So it's a great way to get some good information at the very beginning. One other thing I wanted to point out here, I was working with another debater looking at some of the sources, and they didn't know what one of the sources was. And so I said, well, you should ask ChatGPT how credible it is. So here's a question about Reuters as a news source. And I just asked ChatGPT, and it says, well, Reuters is a well-respected news organization, been in operation for 160 years, generally considered to be a credible news source. So for a student working on a topic for something they aren't very familiar with, they might say, what's foreign affairs? I don't know what that journal is. So they can ask ChatGPT for some of that information. there is always a chance it's going to get it wrong, as you might when you just look for a random web search too. But this is going to give them a better sense about how to characterize it, what the credibility might be. And I think there's some other potential uses of web chat GPT when we get into the use of developing evidence for debates and for speeches. And that's certainly something that I think you should explore.
I'm curious, Anand, could you ask it the question? What is the credibility of a source? It's called the Daily Wire. So one thing I really like about the results, and I'm sure some people would disagree on the credibility rating based on maybe their political orientation, and we aren't here to discuss that. But one thing that's very important to point out is that it is a politically conservative American news and opinion website, right? Because to a student, they're not going to know the difference between Reuters and the Daily Wire, right? Until, maybe advance farther in their education. But that's something important to know, right? Reuters, I think most people would agree, is more objective than the Daily Wire. And it serves a different purpose, right? One of the purposes of the Daily Wire is to promote conservative ideas. And you could find the same thing with some liberal media, but this is a very quick way for students to learn about a lot of the sources that they may be using for a paper or a speech.
And when they're talking about source credibility, maybe in a debate where they're comparing source credibility, this would be really great. Or when they're evaluating evidence for a paper, it'd be excellent for them to go and dive into some of these sources. I mean, I can imagine for a writing assignment, if I asked the students maybe in a freshman paper, a freshman seminar, a freshman composition class, if you have 6 sources, I want you to also evaluate the credibility of each of the sources. And in this case, it not only gives you understanding of this, the credibility of the source, but also cites other sources to talk about that. So in this case, it's talking about media bias and fact check, and it talks about the Daily Wire. There was another one that I think was Axios, remember correctly? This is from All Sides. There was another one that was Axios, I think. Yeah, talking about the size of the business, how it's grown. So in terms of even discussing the credibility, it's pulling from other sources to discuss how it's viewed by other media sources, which is really useful. So this would be a great exercise for, I think instructors to have students do when they're evaluating the credibility of sources they're using for a paper or getting ready for a debate, so they understand, hey, maybe this isn't very credible. I need to find another source on this. And that's not something that we often have students do in an early writing course.
Yeah, this is really, really incredible. And I'd say like maybe we're at the first or second batter of the first inning of ChatGPT and generative AI.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I think what we also,
Go ahead.
I was going to say we should also, think
you
about
have more.
how we can teach students. I was just going to say, thinking about this, what it can offer. As Stefan mentioned before, this is going to continue to develop, and we know that there are new tools coming out. Microsoft has announced they're going to incorporate it into Bing in some way. It's probably going to be found in Microsoft Office tools. And so this is an important time for us to really engage with our students to talk about what's a realistic way to use it, what's a responsible way to use this tool. So it's not just give me some output and I'm just going to trust in it. It's kind of nice for students to see that it makes mistakes at this stage so that they are critical of what the output is going to be, so they know how to double check it. It's also a good time for them to develop some good practices. So searching source credibility is important. Being able to verify those sources and make sure it's not a hallucination on the part of ChatGPT. To be able to think about, how do I reference this and how do I discuss with the teacher that I'm using ChatGPT or some generative AI platform. I think as instructors and as coaches, we need to have those discussions with our students about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, how do you cite this and reference this. Of course, there are terms of use, and I think some of these, I think ChatGPT, for instance, has a minimum age of 18 for users, but we should talk to them about what's appropriate in the same way that we should be doing that with social media. This is a more powerful tool, and it's going to be, certainly a kind of inevitable in the way it's deployed, and its ubiquity is pretty stunning already. To see the number of people already using it and the way it's going to be deployed will be a really interesting development.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost no limit. You mentioned the number of users. I saw today that I don't know where the number came from, but it certainly seems reasonable. That has 40 million daily users.
Wow.
So that's
and a faster adoption rate than almost any other platform. I mean, in 6 days they had 1 million users, and I think that took like Facebook, like 100 days to be able to get to 1 million
Yeah, and
users, or
Instagram is
Instagram,
like
70 days.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's really it's really just I mean, I'm kind of speechless of its power and the changes that
Yeah.
it's going to make
Yeah.
in education. But I think in some ways, like you've already shown, like a lot of the benefits. Like we tell students, oh, well, like, you know, check out your sources, check out your source quality. Okay, and we can give them some general tools for doing that, right? Like, oh, you know, is this idea replicated? Look up a little information about this website. But like, you can only get so much. But what you can get here is incredible. Like a student can really kind of quickly evaluate, learn about a source they know nothing about, and evaluate it. And even within a debate, start arguing about like which source is better. Like if you're in the middle of the debate and you're in ninth grade, you probably don't know the difference between Reuters and the Daily Wire, right? But if you needed to learn that in a debate, you could find out in like 2 seconds.
Yep. An incredible tool. And it's really our responsibility to teach students how to use it effectively.